You're now listening to Cashed In.
All right, episode 6 of Cashed In. We're making headway here. We've got some momentum and we're just moving along. Today we want to specifically concentrate and talk about tenants, how to acquire tenants. What do you look for in a tenant to potentially rent your property? So Michael and I have a lot of experience in that. We have stories that could go on for days, so we'll try to make it digestible in a 20-minute time frame today. So, Michael, I'll let you start off. Where would you like to begin?
Well, so a common question that I get, is, all right, so I bought a property, it's vacant. Or, you have somebody that you have a property, a tenant leaves, and you're dealing with trying to fill a vacancy. Mm-hmm. So where do I go? How do I find a good tenant? Where do I list it to? And so really, I've found most effective using Zillow Rental Manager, because I just transfer my platform away from that a little bit, but in terms of finding tenants, I use Zillow, which also lists on HotPads, as well as Trulia.
Oh, so it's an aggregate site, which is nice. So
you'll get multiple listings there. And then the same with Apartments.com. Apartments.com, if you pay, I think it's like $300 a year, which I don't, I want to say it's over 100 different platforms that will put it on there.
Oh, wow.
So I find it to be very effective in, at least for starters. They have an application platform there where, someone messages you and says, hey, look, I want to set up a viewing. So I'll message back and forth. It's very secure there. And I'll schedule viewings that way, and say they want to fill out an application. Zillow has their already pre-made applications on there that they could just go in, put their information in.
Interesting.
And I'll get the background check, credit report. You'll get everything already through it.
Oh, so that's free on Zillow?
On Zillow, it used to be free. Now it's $10 a week.
Because when you run credit, it costs
money. They would have to pay, correct.
Okay, so the applier, we'll call it, that's the potential tenant.
They'll still have
like
a quote-unquote application fee. I think it's $25 or $30.
Yeah.
And then what used to be free for me, I have to pay $10 per week, every rolling 7 days, to be able to list it on Zillow.
Got it. Okay, so my experience is a little bit different because I used to be in property management. So when we were kind of posturing looking for a tenant for our clients, there were certain specifications that we had to look for. So for instance, credit, proof of employment. We always ask for like 2 weeks or two
most recent pay stubs.
Most recent pay stubs. If they had enough, can you show enough money in the bank for a couple months, or at least the first month's rent?
3x rule,
the 3x rule. Do you make at least 3 times the amount of what the rent is? Do you have enough for the first month's rent, the security deposit, the last month's rent? Things like that. A criminal background check was very important as well. And then because I was the property manager, I could not decide if my client, the landlord, being the landlord, the property owner, wanted to take them or not. And there's certain things that you can't discriminate against. So
how did that work, though? Because truthfully, I have always managed myself. So having made that, you couldn't make that decision for the landlord. So you would just basically...
I just delivered information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they would, and I did it kind of backwards, which is why I was newer. I was a newer agent, so it took a lot of my time when I was a property manager. It had to fit into their ROI. So I would only charge 10% a month to deliver information and show the property. Send it over to them. Sometimes, people have bad credit, so but they would have to explain why. Was it because you didn't pay, or is it because you're going through a divorce? A lot of people don't buy properties because they go through a divorce and they have, a credit issue.
Yeah, their ex took out 10 credit cards and a car loan.
Yeah. And that's okay. I mean, not okay, but it's understandable. That's just real life until they get back on their feet and I can usher them into a purchase.
Sure.
But I would deliver that information, the landlord would check. So there's things that they can't discriminate on. So if for some reason this landlord wasn't feeling this potential tenant or just didn't want to work with them, the only way that they could deny an applier, a potential tenant, is based on finances. So if their credit didn't meet a certain limit, you couldn't, all the protected classes you could not discriminate on, but it would have to be, if you had bad credit, the landlord could say no, and legally say, I do not want you to occupy my property. If you have a pet things. They can discriminate based on pets. They can't really discriminate on age or, familial status or things like that. But it was interesting to see how the spectrum of the leeway that certain landlords had. Like, some landlords didn't really even care. They're like, do they have the first month's rent and the security deposit? Okay, they can rent. And I'm like, there's way more to this than just that.
Yeah.
But when we talk about this, you're thinking about buying a property, and now I'm speaking to the audience. You're thinking about buying a property, and you want that rental investment. Their biggest thing is, how do I evict someone? Like, their mind goes directly to the worst case scenario. They're like, are they going to destroy my property, and do I have to evict someone? And I have rentals, but I want to ask you, were you afraid of that before you bought your first rental?
Again, I think that plays into the misconceptions around real estate, and the whole due diligence aspect. Look.
Yeah.
If you're gonna buy a property in a market that is, I guess if you want to call it a dying market or a market that's, say, in an opportunity zone.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Which I have.
Are you referring to like a depressed
like
area?
More of a depressed area. Yeah,
okay.
I'm not gonna throw salt on Newcastle, but there's pockets that are there where it's classified as a distressed area. So look, when you do that, you have to understand that there is an element of the demographic that's there that is going to potentially inflict harm on the property. It's very real. People don't take care of it. If they don't take care of themselves, quite frankly, chances are they're probably not going to take care of your property.
Very true.
And so look, if you're in an area like a North Allegheny or Fox Chapel, Upper St. Clair, Cranberry, chances are you're not going to deal with the same type of issues. You'll deal with issues, but the same type of issues as it relates to people not paying or them damaging your property. So I'll give you an example. Actually, kind of just go into reverse just a little bit, because as it relates to those different metrics, right, the 3X rule, three times your gross adjusted income, as it relates to the credit and the background check. For me, I've had a pretty good track record as it relates to not having to evict anyone.
Same, yeah. I haven't had to evict anyone out of my own
It's a
property.
terrible process. It is. A buddy of mine is going through it right now, and it's just, it's really difficult.
I used to get paid to evict people. I mean, because I was a property manager, and my clients were out of state, so I had to show up in court. It's awkward.
That couldn't have been fun.
No.
It's just that. So when you end up ultimately going through that process, so I don't particularly, if someone's 2 times, the monthly rent, and I know that whether the utilities are all included in that or there's different dynamics that are there, the vibe test is a big factor for me.
Yes.
If I vibe with you or I feel like, I get my intuition's good, then chances are I'm probably going to let you rent based on the circumstances.
Yes.
I had a lady that had just recently rented from me that was going through a terrible divorce. I looked at her credit report, and there was just all these different things. Yeah, and it was from him. Yeah. He really put her through the ringer, and I felt terrible. But she was just getting back on her feet. And I feel like, even though I had a mentor before that said, Michael, don't do anyone any favors as it relates to real estate. Don't do it because you're going to get burnt. That came from a bad place because he was burnt multiple times. Yeah. So having said that, I did just go through not a formal eviction process because he ended up ultimately leaving, but I ended up having a tenant that had reached out to me from out of state. He was up in New York, and he ended up he lied to me. Okay. So he ended up saying that the place was for him. He came, looked at it, everything was good. Said that he was going to have his cousin live with him as well. So I said, okay, well, your cousin has to apply and go through the proper protocol. So the original guy whose credit was near 800, had the money in the bank, the funds, was opening up a business at the mall in Monaca. He ended up never being the one to actually stay there. It was his quote-unquote cousin, which turned out to be
a sublet.
Not his cousin. And there were other people that were there that decided that it was, it was a free-for-all. Yeah, they were playing the banjo and the drums at 2 o'clock in the morning. The other tenants were calling me, messaging me. They tore up the front yard. And there was this car.
For what reason?
There was this car that was there every single night. I was so tired of getting videos of this same guy playing this weird, it was just weird like voodoo music in his car. People were getting creeped out.
God.
So nonetheless, long story short, I ended up going there.
This is real life.
I printed out I had my lawyer print out an eviction notice. I knocked on the door. I looked through the window. There was another guy sleeping that I had no idea who he was.
Just a random person. Yep.
So I bang on the door. He comes out. Poor guy has no clothes on. He's in his tighty whities. Okay, this guy had to be like 35 years old. So no judgment, nonetheless. He comes out and I ask him, whose car is this? Because he supposedly didn't have a car.
Yeah.
He goes, oh, the car's leaving. It's leaving. So you said it was leaving for a month.
Car's leaving.
And so, anyways, the guy ended up, I didn't have an issue with it. The guy that owned the business ended up taking the guy out, told him he had to leave. Mm-hmm. He gave me a new guy. I moved him into a more depressed area than that because that doesn't fly in Beaver.
No.
Doesn't really fly in many places.
No, just what a goofy situation. But that's what people do. They think that they sign a lease and they can do whatever they want.
Yeah, they think that once they pay you that first month and that security deposit, that they could kind of finagle their way around other elements of the lease. And that's where you have to really put your foot down and say, look, like it's not worth it. If
it just
they
sounds
lie
like
up front, they're going to lie down the line.
Exactly. It sounds like it's just a total disrespect for you, your property, the people that share walls with this person.
Oh yeah.
It's very odd. And there is a restriction in the lease that says who can occupy. And if someone's occupying consecutively longer than
more than mine is set up for more than a week.
Okay, more than a week, then you're no longer a visitor. You are now an occupant.
Right.
So you need to go through, like you said, the proper channels to even be there, like staying overnight.
Listen, I went there after they were gone, and I went through this mailbox because the other tenant, it's a duplex. He's upstairs. He goes, "Hey, Mike, I'm getting mail in my mailbox now because the mail is overflowing in the other mailbox." I'm like, I said, "All right, don't worry about it. I'll go down there and I'll check it out." Dude, there was like literally 6 names in the for different pieces of mail.
That screams scam to me.
I have no idea who was in that place.
Listen, I've been watching a lot of this might be sidetracked, but I've been watching a lot of these videos on YouTube where they try to catch these scammers that prey on older people, like credit card scammers.
Yeah.
And one of these genius YouTube people, they set someone up and they were able to follow it's like these drop off people or whatever. And what they do is they sign up with leases. And they're like a middleman for dropping out packages, and they scam older people into sending them money.
Oh yeah.
But they send it to places obviously that they're not on the lease for, and they break a piece off for the guy that lets them go to the lease. Yeah. And they're just real fast moving. It makes no sense. It's just goofy shit.
It's scary.
So I mean the red flags in my mind are waving high, thinking that that's some type of scam or some type of illegitimate business.
There was
happening.
All these different. There was
2 in the
American
morning,
Express, Wells Fargo,
underwear in the afternoon, cars that don't leave. I mean, that's just
food everywhere. Ruined my yard. I mean, it was just,
people are sometimes animals. Some of them don't evolve and they just live like.
Well, wait. Then
wild
actually,
beasts.
this just popped into my head too. That same people that run there, mind you, I just renovated the unit.
Oh.
I was going there for the new tenants that moved in there, and I had my cleaning lady in there, and I opened underneath the sink, and for some weird reason they decided that they wanted to change the trap underneath the sink. And
were they hiding something in the trap?
I don't know.
Okay.
So there was water everywhere, and there was a new trap that didn't fit. I don't know what they were doing, and then they changed the random outlet. Like a switch, and it didn't work any longer. And I asked my contractor, I'm like, "Did you screw up and not put the right trap under that sink?" He goes, "Mike, I've been doing this a long time. I have no idea why somebody would do that, or why they would just randomly change an outlet, unless he didn't have a reason for it." So again, these people
hide shit. Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, that sounds like they're looking for a place to hide things, but I don't know. I'm not a criminal yet, so I don't understand what they're trying to do. Yeah, I've definitely had my fair share of goofy interactions with tenants, but not all tenants are goofy. It's just that's where the intuition comes in, because you can't quantify. There's no metric to measure if someone's going to be weird like that.
Yeah, and my intuition was on point there. I just decided not to listen to it.
So you knew?
I
got a bad feeling about this.
I knew when I first met him, and because everything sounded good over the phone.
Yeah.
And so then he had the money and everything, but it ended up not being him.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. He opened up these different stands in malls where they fix phone screens.
Okay.
It could be a very lucrative business.
Yeah.
But he just decided that he was going to give me a terrible employee to work with him.
I'm telling you.
So
some type of YouTube scan, if I had to
very
guess.
well could have been.
A couple of things I wanted to touch on. You mentioned if the utilities are included. So depending on the jurisdiction of where you own something, certain items are lienable. And where I manage most of my time, which was in Lawrence County, is the sewer bill is a lienable item against the property. Unlike gas, electric, things like that. It might suck for the next person who tries to switch utilities into their name if they don't pay. But if they don't pay that sewer bill, which they don't shut off, they will just keep racking up.
The water, sewer,
yeah, I've had that many a times for my landlord clients where they would try to sell the property. Eventually, they're like, Anna, why do I have $1,000 lien for a sewer bill against my property? And it's because the tenants, we weren't, in charge of the utilities. The landlord was. They weren't keeping track and making sure that the tenants were not paying it. And the only way that Newcastle Sanitation gives communication is via a postcard. So it's not like it's online where you can check your account.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of archaic.
Would they give a postcard that says that it's past due, or that they're?
Yeah, but it would just go to the house. So if the landlord's out of state or doesn't get mail
they need a
there,
tenant that's,
they're basically just creating litter in the mailbox. But I know certain jurisdictions own like their water company, or like I think is Elwood City own their power company, Elwood City Electric.
Sure.
I'm not sure,
Yeah.
but those would be considered lienable items. So you want to make sure if you're going to be purchasing a property and renting it out to someone, check on the utilities like that. That would be a huge factor I would recommend, and make sure they're not lienable items. If they are, a lot of landlords will put the water or sewer into their name.
Well, and I know like Beaver Falls, they originally, I know when I first started doing this, I had a property that the water bill went into the tenant's name.
Mm-hmm.
And tenants would just leave and they wouldn't pay it. And quite frankly, I wasn't even informed that they didn't pay it. But being that it would go to collections for them, but it's a lienable item on the property.
Mm-hmm.
So they left, and now I withhold their security deposit until I know what their balance is.
Yes.
But I learned that the hard way. But now they changed it to where now it's all in my name.
Mm-hmm.
So like I could put them as like kind of like a sub tenant or sub account user, if you would, and they still ultimately pay it on a quarterly basis. But yeah, so a lot of these municipalities are gravitating towards that because of that same issue.
Totally. Yeah, another thing that just sparked in my memory too was security deposits. So you don't have to, upon them exiting, give their security deposit on the day that they're exiting. You have like at least a 30-day window. And if they leave any items or personal property behind, it's considered abandonment after so many days. I think that's designated in the lease. Mm-hmm. So if they leave, something behind of value, or sometimes it's not of value, it could just be a bunch of trash, but it becomes your responsibility.
I charge them for it, yeah.
Well, you can take it out of the security deposit.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of like conflict occurs, because either the landlord and the tenant don't agree on how much damage or how much work they left for the landlord has been done. Mm-hmm. So they don't get the full security deposit back, and that causes some issues sometimes. But
yeah, security deposit's definitely a hot issue.
You have an inspection, like a pre-rental inspection, and then have a post-rental inspection. Mm-hmm. And then when you put those, you can compare notes and say, okay, there's a hole in the wall here that I have to pay.
Mark it down,
mark it down, take it out of the deposit for however much it was, and kind of justify. So there's really no way, a tenant could argue with you.
Specify too, like the holes, like even if they're just for a picture hole.
Yeah.
And specify, look, you could hang something on the wall. If that's not done, you're paying $5 per hole in the wall.
Yeah.
So that's another element of it. I think that as it relates to secure, I've never been one to, and I know you had mentioned this earlier with the company that you worked for that did property management. I'm amazed. Some people, they'll charge first month's, last month's, and security deposit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is interesting. I've only charged one and one, like just first month's or prorated month and then their security
deposit. It was
deposit.
Landlord dependent.
Did a lot of people do that?
Some, like out of state people who lived in like a larger metro, like people from Boston or people from Toronto. I guess it's customary there.
Were they worried about someone not paying? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so they would do that, and then by the end of the lease, then the tenant, before they're they give their 30-day or their 60-day written notice that they're leaving, they just wouldn't pay the last month.
Interesting. So,
And they have to give a notice. If they don't give a notice, they are not entitled to that security deposit.
yes, that's what I do. I make sure that it's 60 days for me,
Yeah.
like upon renewal, or else it's going to roll right into the renewal.
Yeah, so I guess this should be informative to tenants and landlords alike, especially when it comes to access. So if I tell a tenant that we need to access the property, you only have to give them typically 24-hour notice, whether they like it or not.
Right.
And a lot of times we had to have rental inspections, and the tenant would say, well, I'm not going to be home. Like, well, that's too bad. Like, this is the only time the person from the county can come. This is the only time I'm available. Like, we're entering my property. So that was the only time that I would have time to do a county-required lease. So I would come into a property once I gave them proper notice. And they couldn't really decide whether I could or could not enter. Being the manager, I had I was like almost like I was like a pseudo-landlord. So I really like the intuition thing that you mentioned, because obviously you would have avoided that whole scenario with the goofy guy at the mall kiosk if you would have listened to your intuition. And I've done the same thing because it's a weird society we live in, and you want to make sure that you give everyone a fair shot. And if there's nothing that you can, someone will come back at you and say that you are not wanting to work with somebody for reasons that aren't true.
Right.
And to protect...
Say you're being discriminatory.
Exactly. When that's not even the case. When it was a feeling, it had nothing to do with, like, whatever that guy was about. You know what I mean? It was, you know what I mean? So it can be a tricky situation. I have dealt with people who have just disappeared and have never, told me they were leaving. Yeah, I've dealt with that. I've dealt with people who, we talk about depressed areas. I used to rent a place out that was once had a drive-by on it multiple times because of the tenant and her affiliations with certain businesses, which was interesting, which out of my pay grade. If a place gets shot up, do not call me. You call 911. I'm not doing anything to stop this shootout or investigate it. Call 911. I've had that happen. I don't know. This is like, I'm talking about, like, these are like 10-year-old stories. Like, I don't have these dealings anymore.
Yeah, they have. I mean, another thing I think to point out is that part of my process is references. Okay.
Oh, I was gonna say that too. Yeah. Like, I asked for work references, and I've asked for previous landlord references, and I call them and I have a conversation. And sometimes it will be conflicting on what their quote unquote letter reads. Which is, I would never, I would just give my friend's number, if that was me, if I needed a place.
Right. I think about that all the time.
Yeah. As far as that goes, but not all tenants are terrible. Like, it really comes down to communication. Like, I've had really great people who have rented through the property management company and who have rented, at my properties. I have a really good relationship with my tenants, and, they'll call me. I know what's going on. Back to the favors thing, like you said, someone told you not to give favors. So if someone is more than 5 days late, I don't think twice about posting an eviction. And that's because of my experience of going to the magistrate over and over and over again.
Right.
Because when I used to give people leeway, you give them an inch, they took a mile from me. And I don't know if it was because I was younger or whatever, or they couldn't make ends meet, or they were just trying the system. I don't know. So I found that if I gave people leeway on their rents, it was a bigger headache with my actual client, who's the landlord, in the long run. It ended me up in court every time, I listened to someone's story and it pulled on my heartstrings. And I was like, oh, okay, we'll just wait another week. Then we'll wait another week. And then now it's a whole month. And now they're 2 months behind. And now I'm sitting in front of a judge and they're like, well, why didn't you post, Dan? The judge is asking me, why aren't you posting, on behalf of your client? And I'm like, well, she said, well, did you prove that, Anna? And I'm like, oh, fuck, So I've learned from experience that, unfortunately, if someone's like 5 days late, You post it just to stay ahead of the curve, because the order of operations is you have to post a notice to quit or termination of lease. And then you file with the magistrate, and you have to pay to file for your hearing. And you're at the mercy of the court on when they're going to schedule your hearing. And say you go to your hearing and you win. So you win the hearing. Now the tenant has 19 days to exit the property. Like, they can literally stay there for 19 more days.
Squatter.
Yes. Yeah. So that is also, I believe, jurisdiction specific, but just all I know is from the county that I used to manage through. And so this person, you know, they're late after 5 days plus 19. You know, it starts to get into a lot of time that you're going to lose out on a month anyway.
Right. And not counting the previous months that they already did that with.
So.
Yeah, there's a. I had a recent situation that, so based on those references, previous landlord references, I find those to be valuable, but they don't necessarily always hold the water as it relates to it, because sometimes you'll get a landlord that has somebody in there that they're upset that they're leaving because now they have to fill that vacancy.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and maybe they're coming from a not as good of an area and they weren't that bad of a tenant. So, for example, I just filled a vacancy, and they had, I'm not gonna name the location, but it was a hotel they were staying at in Beaver County, and I called and I spoke to the girl, and the girl said, "Oh yeah, you know, these people were great. You know, they paid every month. You know, they were trying to get on their feet last year, like last summer a little bit, so they were a little bit late. But yeah, there was no issues with it at all. Next thing you know, 3 days later, the owner of the hotel calls me, and this is a small place, probably like 20 to 30 units in the hotel.
Okay.
So he goes, "Oh, I can't believe that you're renting to him, and you know he's late and he's abusive towards his girlfriend and all this stuff." And so I said, "Okay, if that's the case, why was he staying in your place for 6 months?
Yeah.
Why didn't you move forward with the process? Because there was no lease in place. It was week to week.
Yeah.
He was just paying you $250 a week to stay there, and you never had an issue with it. Now all of a sudden that he's leaving, you want to call me not once, not twice, 3 times and sit there and ask me why, just to watch myself and be careful, don't let him behind and all this stuff." So, you know, and the guy's been fine. He's been great. Now, truthfully, I might have had a little bit of a stigma because that's in the back of my head. So I don't always fully trust what he says, because he also didn't tell me the whole truth about what was on his background check. But nonetheless, I went with my intuition, my gut. He's respectful towards me, and I have no reason at this point to sit there and to think otherwise. So again, like those references, as you're calling different people and asking about previous tenants, they're probably true, but there's also another side to it, more than likely, as well.
Yeah, it always take into account the source of where you're getting your information from. So you're thinking this landlord was a little bit disgruntled that he was leaving.
It's a dying hotel, you know, or motel, whatever you want to call it. So it was probably one of the best renters that he had in there every single week. He was making $1,000 a month off of this couple, and you know that place is, I don't want to say it's by the hour, but it's not like it's a Holiday Inn, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I try to put that into context, you know, around what people say, because there's a lot of bitter asshole landlords out there.
I can't believe he made that call to you. That's an evil
3
person.
times. He called me like 2 weeks after he had already talked. I'm like, "What are you calling me for again, saying the exact same thing? We already spoke about this."
Yeah.
You know, and so he probably hasn't had someone in there since like that. And I know that he probably got hit over COVID with, you know, the occupancy probably being lower than he wanted. And he had somebody that was finally in there on a monthly basis for 6 months. So
over COVID, did you have any tenants not paying?
Not really. I've heard horror stories around that, but I worked with people around that. You know, I really did. I was blessed not to have to defer any loans or anything like that, any payments. So
same. My tenants, they had it together. They made it work.
Yeah, and it was good, and that's part of that process. I mean, obviously, I couldn't have predicted, you know.
Well, you couldn't evict them anyway. Yeah, we couldn't predict the virus.
You know,
but also, they paused. There was a moratorium on evictions.
With the CARES Act, yeah. So that was that was the whole Bellevue fiasco. You know, with those people that were in there, but I just, and people knew that, my tenants knew that, and I worked with, you know, a couple of them, you know, but it does go into the fact that, you know, when you do something nice for someone, which there were people that I did multiple things that were nice for them. I let them pay, over the course of 3 months. I mean, the one was behind, and then lo and behold, they leave, and it's like, oh, right away, I'm an asshole. Like I did something to you, really? Like, I'm a terrible landlord. I just did X, Y, and Z for you over the last 3 years that you've been here. I've always tried to do what's right by you, and ultimately, I'm the one that you want to sit there and smear after you move out because you had a high water bill that somehow you want to blame me for.
Oh my goodness.
So it's just, again, putting a lot of this into context. I think that at the end of the day, it's doing your due diligence. Using credible platforms. Facebook Marketplace is actually a pretty decent one, shockingly. Usually you get a bunch of spammers on there. So using reputable platforms and using your intuition, if you trust your own intuition. Again, maybe not for starters, starting out, like if you're a new landlord, new investor, maybe
you're not going to have any experience.
You're not going to know what your intuition's telling you. You're probably just going to be like, oh, I just cut this check for thousands of dollars to buy this property, and I want to make sure that I'm getting a good tenant in here as quickly as possible. So again, it's doing that due diligence and trusting the process and the people that are mentoring you.
Yeah, and if you decide to not self-manage, make sure you interview the property management company, because I'm not saying all property managers are fantastic. I luckily have relationships with fantastic ones. Like, I work with a property management company that's amazing, but one of my really good friends, he rented a place in Swickley and didn't have as much luck. He was having issues with the management company versus the landlord.
Really?
Yeah, like, he paid his whole rent up front, which was like $90,000 for the year. So a good tenant right off the bat. Like, here you go. Like, I'm renting this house. Like, I don't want to worry about rental payments. There was an issue in the basement where there's I don't know if it was a French drain or something, but the property management company promised to get it fixed. And he was like moving in. It was like timing was not on our side, so he had to find a place like ASAP. Finds a place, pays all the money up front. Management company says we'll fix the issue. Never fix it. This is 13 months later. He leaves a month early because his work and his travels, whatever, doesn't have to be here anymore. Leaves a month early, so they only rented for 11 months. Had all this money up front. He wants the security deposit back.
Sure.
Being that he was never able to use the basement, and this was like a 6,000 square foot house. It was a finished basement because of mold, because of the moisture and the water coming in. The property management company never took care of it. Now, this is my friend. He's like, what the fuck? Yeah. I'm like, well, let me get a mold remediation company in there. I have connections. I'll get somebody in there, and we'll just invoice the property management company if they're busy or whatever. Like, we can coordinate someone to get in there to fix this problem. They're going to take care of it anyway. So we get a remediation company to go over there. They're like, no, we'll use our own. Like, we don't need to use yours. I'm like, okay. Never fix it. Like, this is like, obviously, the end of the story. So, he couldn't use about, I think it was like 2,000 square feet of this property the whole time. Pays all his money up front. Now they're not giving his security deposit back, which was $7,000. And it's a small town. The landlord's local. It's Pittsburgh. He starts talking. He's like, oh, one of my friends knows the landlord. Reaches out to the landlord. Guy's cool as hell. Like, oh my God, like, why wouldn't we get this fixed? It was the management company.
Oh, wow.
And they still won't take the blame. We have everything documented between my communication with the management company, his communication, them making false promises. Like, they have all this money up front. Like, what is going on? This was not a $90,000 fix. This was at most maybe $10,000 fix. But this is your own asset anyway that you need to be protecting whether he's in it or not.
Right.
So my whole point to that spiel was make sure you have and you vet out a property management company if you're going to be having someone managing your assets. And this was not a low-end rental by any means. Like, this was a fully funded, like, property management company, and they completely dropped the ball. And if I remembered their name, I would just shout them out to warn you. But now they're going to court over it. Now he retained a lawyer because he can afford it. Like, why don't you just give back the security deposit? This management company wants to make an argument and refuse now. So he's like, okay, like, I guess we're going to court for sport now.
Yeah.
But yeah, property managers are just as important as vetting out as tenants.
Right.
So, but, okay. So yeah, I mean, we could talk about this endlessly. Yeah. It's a very interesting topic because it can apply to all spectrums of what type of asset you own, all spectrums of people renting. You know, there is a through line to, you know, credit, to the 3X rule, to references. There is that through line whether you're renting to somebody who's paying $500 a month or, you know, $10,000 a month. So it's very interesting. But yeah, thank you guys for listening to Cashed In. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Michael or myself, and I look forward to hearing from you.